Taylor McHargue, ESPN and CBS college football analyst, joins us on 365 Sports. And news that of interest to Taylor is Rice has fired their head coach. And obviously they had the nice win against UTSA, which it appeared maybe was going to put him in a nice direction, but didn't work out. And Taylor, your thoughts about your alma mater changing coaches?
Yeah, first thing, head coach Mike Bloomgren, it was always great to me. I think just as a person, nothing but good things to say about him, and wish him, the best of luck in his next stop, wherever that is. And it's unfortunately it is the nature of this line of work, right? I mean, how often do we talk about this time of year, different people's jobs? And I think it's easy, and I'm guilty of this, to kind of be flippant about talking about this stuff, but then you realize, this impacts more than just the head coach. Who these guys, they do make a lot of money at the very top, but this goes all the way down to your recruiting staff, your on-campus staff, and this impacts all of their families. And so I hate to see him be let go just from the human perspective, but you're 24 and 52 during his time there, and there wasn't a winning season. And it was in his seventh year where I think the results, the win over UTSA, going into the season, if you said you beat UTSA, that's great. But I think UTSA is kind of shoulder to shoulder with Rice as one of the bottom 4 or 5 teams in the American Conference. And so, it's a place that there are a lot of challenges to win at Rice. The academic standards are tough. It's not a place that's going to be overly supportive in the NIL era. But that doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities out there. And I think in the American Conference specifically, the expectation is to be getting to a bowl game, if not every year, every other year, and having winning seasons, being on the outside, having an outside shot at conference championships every few years. And that just wasn't really happening. And I think that's kind of the minimum expectation, and that wasn't being met. And I can tell you just from the pulse of the alumni, there were not many supporters by this point. I think the offense specifically, and Bloomgren being an offensive-minded coach, really not a lot of success, a really hard time developing high school talent. Most of the starters that had come in and had success tended to be transfers. And at a place like Rice, I think still a believer in you have to recruit well from the high school ranks, and that wasn't really happening.
Taylor, what do you see as his immediate future? Does he maybe go back to being an offensive line coach for a little bit?
Yeah, I think he had experience in the NFL. He was offensive coordinator for Stanford during some of Andrew Luck, and was there when Christian McCaffrey was there. And I think there is no doubt that he can drop in, and whether it's at the NFL level or high Power 4 level, he could be a great O-line coach. And I think it's very likely in the next few years he'll be back as an offensive coordinator soon. And then maybe, who knows, gets another shot at being a head coach down the line, and wish him, obviously, again, the best of luck. But his experience up until, his time at Rice, ton of success, and a really well-respected offensive line coach. And I'm sure he will land somewhere soon.
Taylor, I know we typically talk a lot of big games, but as far as the big brands, but the teams like Boise State and UNLV, and especially with that game last week, I think that's where we deserve to start off, because I know you got a lot of love for the lesser known schools or lesser promoted schools as well. What were your thoughts on what was a pretty big game last week, and a game where Ashton Jeanty didn't go crazy but still had respectable numbers and ultimately helped Boise State get a big win?
Unbelievable game, first and foremost, and I think UNLV, credit to Barry Odom and that team, and Hajj Malik Williams, he played pretty well. I think they're obviously, Ashton Jeanty deserves a ton of credit, and I know he didn't have the yards per carry wasn't what we had seen in the past. I thought UNLV had a pretty good plan for him. He still ended up with well over 100 yards for the game. But I think the thing that stands out to me more and more as the season goes along with Boise State is that front seven, their defense. I've had a couple games this year in the Mountain West where I've had to go back and watch film really in detail of Boise State, and they just do such a good job of creating havoc at the line of scrimmage. And Hajj Malik Williams, it felt like every time he dropped back, it was a second and a half, maybe 2 seconds, and he had somebody in his lap. And I go back to, watched a lot of tape of Washington State and their film earlier in the year. That's a ranked team now that is playing really well. They lost by 3 scores at Boise State, and they had pressure on John Mateer all night. So I think that's been a calling card for them. And I think as the season goes along and Oregon continues to play well, I think Boise State is a group of 5 team that I don't want to give some crazy splashy headline, but as the season goes along, it does feel like this could be a team that if you said who has a shot to get a win in the playoff, I think they're probably your best bet because they play really good defense and they run the football well. Now, they would need some help, likely going on the road in a playoff scenario, but that's a team I promise you any at-large bid that makes the playoff does not want to play Boise State because their brand of football and having a Heisman, what looks like is going to be at a minimum a Heisman finalist, you do not want to have to play them in the playoffs.
Taylor, the big game nationally this week, Ohio State, Penn State. Can James Franklin finally kind of make the statement that, look, they're probably a playoff team anyway, but nobody's going to have any faith in them unless they win a game like this?
I think, well, Penn State, as it has always been the story, right, since the playoff came around, that Penn State seemingly almost every year ends up 10-2, and their losses were to Michigan and Ohio State, and they make a New Year's Six Bowl, but they're not in the playoffs. And that's been the case every single season. I think this is the type of game where if they win, you talk about Penn State taking that next step, like you mentioned, where, okay, this all of a sudden becomes a team that we're talking about. Can they win the Big Ten this year? Can they end up having a bye in the first round? I think this is a playoff team pretty much regardless. But if you're a Penn State fan, this is the exact scenario it feels like we've seen them in so often under James Franklin. And I think a lot of this is going to depend on, can Drew Aller go? He had the knee injury a week ago, tried to come back in the third quarter. Backup in his place played well, but I think for Aller, can he go is going to be huge against Ohio State. And for Ohio State, this is a big spot for them to try and get a big win on the road after they lost. I know it was close to Oregon, but another big shot. And I promise you, Ohio State is thrilled that they're playing this game early. It's kind of in my opinion, a travesty that they're not playing this as a night game and getting that Penn State whiteout game, but it's a big spot for Ohio State.
Taylor McHargue with us, CBS and ESPN on 365 Sports. Taylor, the Big 12 has 3 teams right now that are trying to separate. There's a few that are saying, hey, don't forget about us, and one of them is Deion and Colorado and a win against Cincinnati and where they are. Your thoughts about, one, they're bowl eligible. Now they're inside the top 25. How much of a ceiling did you think they had before the year started?
Man, I'm one of the people absolutely that's having to kind of eat my words as the season's gone along. I thought for a while now that Travis Hunter, that this would limit his Heisman odds because I thought this would end up being a 6-6, 7-5 type of team. I just didn't think they played with enough physicality, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And that has just not been the case. This is a good football team. They are playing well. They are playing physical. And it really grabbed my attention when they went on the road a couple of weeks ago, or 3 or 4 weeks ago now, and went to Central Florida and mauled Central Florida. And as the season has gone along, you can tell they're finding an identity and playing with more and more confidence as the year goes along. And I think there is absolutely a path for them to not only make it to the Big 12 championship, but to win the Big 12 championship. And then at the top, it's been, I think, the story of the season for the Big 12, just the surprise in look at where these teams that are at the top now, where they were ranked in the preseason, and where all the teams that are at the bottom were ranked at the preseason. It's basically just flipped on its head. Kansas and Oklahoma State at the bottom, they were ranked right at the top coming into the preseason. BYU, I think, was like 12th, 11th or 12th coming into the season in the Big 12 preseason rankings. And now all of a sudden they've got some of the best odds in the country to make the playoffs. So it's been fascinating to kind of watch as this season has played out. But, yeah, no doubt about it. I've had to eat my words. And what I thought this team for Colorado was going to be and what they looked like in the first couple of weeks is completely different than my perspective of them now.
Do you think there's really a big decision to make for Mike Elko in terms of Marcel Reed versus Connor Wegman after the heroics of last Saturday? And how do you think that's best handled, I guess?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because Marcel Reed comes in and he only has to throw the ball twice. And against LSU, he benefited tremendously from the turnovers that A&M's defense created. I believe his first two possessions when he came in, they had great field position, I know, both times, but I think it was inside the 30 both times. And the first one, I think, inside the 10. So anytime you come in as a backup spot, you're trying to create that spark. They certainly did that, but I think that was aided by A&M's defense and creating those takeaways. I think Elko's comments about Wegman and going to his aid and saying, look, as a team across the board on offense, we were not playing well. We weren't calling the game well. We didn't feel like we were coaching the game well. Receivers weren't responding, and Wegman wasn't playing great. And that's when you go to a backup spot. It's the same thing Texas did a couple weeks ago. You're trying to create that spark. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, right? Texas brings Arch Manning in and he spikes a couple balls in the dirt, and then Quinn Ewers is back out in the third quarter. So I think for this week, I would go with Marcel Reed. I think his ability to run the football, it's a similar style to what we were just talking about with Boise State, but for Texas A&M, play good defense, create some takeaways, and run the football effectively, and don't turn the football over, because that's something, this front that they're about to go face with South Carolina, it's one of the best fronts in the SEC. I know it's not a great team, but they've got to figure out a way to protect the football, run the football well, and this is the absolute definition of a trap game going to South Carolina this week for A&M.
Taylor, we talked, I know, a little bit about the Big 12 earlier, but there's coaches in the Big 12 who were on the hot seat, off the hot seat. Two of them kind of played each other this week. People were questioning Sonny Dykes and the way that TCU was playing, and Dave Aranda entered the year on the hot seat. They played each other this weekend. Would you say that they're off now, both of them, given the way that they've kind of rallied here?
I don't know that I would say that for Dave Aranda yet, and you guys may disagree, but I still think there are some opportunities that are out there ahead of them that Baylor could end up with a 8-4. I think that probably are they going to win out? No, I don't think so. But where is that temperature right for Baylor? Is 7-5 good enough for Dave Aranda? I don't think 6-6 is. For Sonny Dykes, that was a humongous win against Texas Tech. And now all of a sudden TCU, I saw some stuff this week, TCU fans starting to kick around what would it look like to win out the rest of the way. If they end up in a spot where they just have two Big 12 losses, can they make it to the Big 12 championship? You're starting to really get some hope. And that was a huge win over Texas Tech, and the way that they did that in the fourth quarter. I think for TCU, my opinion, from the outside looking in, for a team that was literally in the national championship 2 years ago and having to totally recreate themselves, I don't think a change is made with TCU and Sonny Dykes. But for Dave Aranda, and again, you guys and your listeners will probably know this better than I will, but I don't see a way that 6-6 is good enough. I think the expectations are too high in Waco, and I don't know that this team is good enough to get to win out and get to 8-4, which in my opinion is probably the mark that they need.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think
that's very fair. I think we don't really know. I don't think we really know. I think it might be the style of 6-6. Taylor, is 6-6 with you losing your last couple of games, or is it winning your? I think it all just depends. But yeah, it's still very much in the air, I feel like.
Yeah, and the challenge, coming down the stretch, obviously this is a huge spot this week, and getting TCU and Waco is massive. Going to Morgantown is always tough to play. You have to imagine they win at Houston. But I think the last 2 weeks, you guys make a great point on what does the style look like. You go to Houston and close out the season against Kansas. Those are two games that I don't think there's any question that Baylor should win both of those games, especially getting Kansas at home. By the end of the season, they'll be they're not going to make a bowl. If Baylor loses either one of those to Houston or Kansas, I think that's going to be a terrible taste in the mouth for Baylor fans. If they end up going 3-1 the rest of the way and get to 7-5, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's not a change that's made. But I just go back to the temperature and the feeling for alumni and fans. It felt like all offseason and through this season. I don't know how many Baylor fans would say that they're satisfied right now. And if you end up at 7-5, is that enough with some of the opportunities that were out there earlier in the season, blown leads on the road against Iowa State? I don't know. Again, we'll see. But the last 2 weeks, I think that's going to be the biggest tell is how does Baylor play against two of the teams that are going to end up being in the bottom of the conference.
Yeah, we had some conversations about what would be the minimum wage, so to speak, on what the bar. And we don't know. Don't get to talk to Mac hardly ever. Used to be able to talk to him. No, I mean, we don't. I get a chance to, visit with him. Not that he would, say something on the record. But, okay. Who do you have this week?
We got a bye week. We are in a spot in the season where CBS didn't have a ton of product this week, and they swapped some stuff around. So I am hanging out at the house, going to be watching well, unfortunately, I got to go to a toddler's birthday party. But then I will be watching football after that.
Did he say unfortunately?
Unfortunately,
we record the show.
Those things are, top to bottom fun. It's like a kegger, but without any of that stuff.
I don't think we're going to the same toddler birthday party that you are.
No, I don't envy that. It's one of those things where it's forced. You're kind of in there. You hope you got a friend in the room, but once you walk in, you're starting the clock, aren't you?
Yeah, there's no doubt. But we'll get a chance to. These are some of our best friends. So God forbid they hear this. Love you, JP and Michelle. Excited to celebrate your daughter, and we'll have a great time. But no, I'm looking forward to watching a ton of football this weekend.
Enjoy, Taylor. Thank you very much for your time as always. Great timing, unfortunately, because of Rice changing their coach, but also the access he has and the games he does to college football and the fact he played the game as a quarterback at Rice.